nice singing. Can y'all hear me? Is this on? This is on now. Great. Thank you, Arcadia. I appreciate it. Our wisdom story today comes from our own Unitarian Universalist tradition, from religious educator Mary Ann Moore, who comes from Arizona. It's called Hide and Seek with God. Once upon a time, God invited all of God's friends to come and play a game. See, God was kind of bored and kind of lonely, and so God said, "Hey, everybody, let's have fun together." And everybody said, "That sounds great, God. We would love to have fun together. What should we play?" Someone suggested hide and seek. And so God was going to be the first to hide. So poof, God went and hid. And all of God's friends, the people, didn't even have to count to 10 because God didn't need the time. God could just poof and be gone and be hidden. And so everybody said, "Okay, time to look for God." But to do so, first they had to ask themselves some really good questions. Questions like, where could we find God? And do we think God's going to be in the tiny spaces or in the really big spaces? And has God changed? When God hid, and if God's in a tiny space or a big space or what space, does that mean God changed? And best of all, can we have a lot of fun asking questions and finding God? So they decided to give it a try, and they went out searching. One person thought, I wonder where God is, and maybe I wonder if God is in those tiny spaces. And they came to the earth, they came to a field, and they got down on their knees, and they started looking in that field, and they saw the blades of grass, and the tiniest blade of grass, just a couple inches high. They noticed how amazing it was, the little stripes on that little blade of grass, how it had grown up from the dirt, from a tiny, tiny, tiny seed. And they felt a sense of wonder, and they thought, I have found God. Another person who was asking about finding God in those big, big spaces, that person went off and was looking all day, and then it was nighttime, and they looked up at the stars. And they said, "Oh, that's the biggest space I could ever imagine. Those stars go so far, and there's so many. And the night sky is full of such mystery and wonder, and it's amazing." And they thought to themselves, I have found God. And another person thought, well, where could God be? And they wandered around through town, and they kept bumping into people, and they kept having these nice conversations, asking these people that they bumped into, well, where do you think God is? Have you found God? Have you been searching? Not like there's a specific God to find, but have you found your own version of God or the sacred? And where do you think God could be? And every person they spoke with had a different answer. And they thought, I have found pieces of God in each other. And they went a little farther through the town, and they heard some people chanting. And it turned out that the people had gathered to chant in a protest to work for justice. And they said, all together we are powerful, and we can make a big noise, and we can work together to make our world a better place. I have found God in people. I have found God in us. And so all of God's friends, these three and even more, everybody who had been searching, at the end of the game, they all came back together, and God came too, and they all said, hey, I found God, and went around and told about the questions that they had asked and about how and where they had found and discovered God in their hide-and-seek game. And God was delighted. God loved being found in so many different places, and even by so many different names. And finally, they asked the best question of all. What game should we play next? The end.
Now is the time in our service when we would normally sing the children out, but we are having the children's program this morning is the Elf Festival workshop thing that's happening in the Parish Hall. So they've been there the whole time. Though I do see there are some kids with us still this morning, so you are welcome to stay if you would like. But if you would like to go to the Elf workshop, you're certainly welcome to exit through the back doors, go down the stairs, and head to the Parish Hall, because that's a lot of fun. And now for our readings. We have two readings this morning. The first is from Rainer Maria Rilke. He wrote, "Be patient toward all that is unsolved in your heart, and try to love the questions themselves, like locked rooms and like books that are now written in a very foreign tongue. Do not now seek the answers which cannot be given you, because you would not be able to live them. And the point is to live everything. Live the questions now. Perhaps you will then gradually, without noticing it, live along some distant day into the answer." Our second reading this morning is an excerpt from Self-Reliance by our good friend Ralph Waldo Emerson. It reads, "A foolish consistency is the hobgoblin of little minds, adored by little statesman and philosopher and divines. With consistency, a great soul has simply nothing to do. He may as well concern himself with his shadow on the wall. Speak what you think now in hard words, and tomorrow speak what tomorrow thinks in hard words again, though it contradict everything you said today. The voyage of the best ship is a zigzag line of 100 tacks. See the line from a sufficient distance, and it straightens itself to the average tendency. Your genuine action will explain itself, and will explain your other genuine actions. Your conformity explains nothing." In Western culture, we like answers. We like reason and rationality. We like scientific theorems and mathematical proofs. We like self-help books that tell us what to do and how to be. We like knowing and we like knowledge. There is safety and comfort to be found for many of us in having answers and in knowing. In Unitarian Universalism, we affirm and promote a free and responsible search for truth and meaning. Many, perhaps most of us, interpret that to mean that we're supposed to find the truth, to find the answer, or at least our answers. Our Western culture tends to lead us to a results-oriented approach. Many of us, perhaps some of you, have taken a popular Unitarian Universalist adult religious education class titled Building Your Own Theology. I like the class a lot. I think the content has a lot of merit, but I don't like the implication of the title. Like you can build your theology once, and then like you'd build a building and be done, that's it. When I've offered my own version of that class, I've titled it Exploring Your Theology. And I've invited people who've taken the class who've come before to take it again, because to me, our theology and our beliefs, it's not something we build once, but something we revisit and explore over and over again, because it changes over time. Now, there are many world religions that offer their adherents very specific, often very powerful answers. This is how the world was created. This is God, this is the nature of God, and this is how you should worship God. This is the way you should be in the world. This is the only way to be in the world, sometimes. If you think about what you know about some of the world religions, many of them really want you to accept and believe their answers to the big questions about life, and sometimes even to some of the smaller questions. Now, to be clear, there is a lot of nuance in most of the world religions and many different sects and much variation. I'm not offering a universal observation about other religious traditions. I'm merely lifting up that many of them are answer-focused. Catholicism is a good example. In many cases, the leaders of the Catholic Church have their answers and they stick to them, come hell or high water. In my ideal world, we Unitarian Universalists, in contrast, are question-focused. We don't tell you, you should believe in God, or you should believe in this specific God. We ask you, what do you believe about the existence or non-existence of God? We don't tell you, here's what's going to happen to you after you die. We ask you, what do you believe is going to happen to you after you die? Now, lest you think all we do is ask questions and that you can believe whatever you want, that's also not true. We Unitarian Universalists have clearly defined beliefs and values, especially as it regards how we relate to ourselves and to one another as we live together on this planet. We believe in inclusivity, equity, and justice for everyone, and especially for those who hold marginalized identities. But even in those places where we do have some clearly identified answers, we hold the form of the answers loosely because we know they change and evolve. For example, seeking and creating justice in the world has always been a Unitarian Universalist value. It was even a Unitarian value and a Universalist value before the merger in 1961. This belief in justice has not always meant, though, that we have been anti-racist. In fact, Unitarians and Universalists in particular were sometimes happily racist. Anti-racism is a position we have evolved into in our justice work, and thankfully it seems unlikely we'll go back. So one of our answers to the question, what does justice look like in our country as a Unitarian Universalist, has now evolved to include anti-racism work. And there is still further refining that has happened and will continue to happen. We will probably always value anti-racism work, but we have shifted what we do, how we do that work significantly, even just during my lifetime. It used to be, when I was younger, that we thought we should shame white people and make them feel bad about being white. We have since learned that that is not the best way to approach anti-racism work. And so one of our answers to the question, what does UU justice look like in our country, is now doing anti-racism work in a way that heals and that does not cause further harm. Our answer has evolved and become more refined, and hopefully it will keep doing so. That example is a good demonstration of why it's so important that we ask the important questions over and over again and don't settle for our original answer. Because our answers change over time. They change based on what we learn from other people. They change based on our experiences. Sometimes the shifts are big, racist to anti-racist. Sometimes the shifts are smaller, like refining how we do our anti-racism work. Change happens, though. Changes happen when we're open to them. Here's another example. An important question we've already touched on is, what do you believe about the existence or non-existence of God? For me, I have lived my life in what I consider true Unitarian Universalist fashion, and my answer to that question has evolved over time. When I was a kid, I was heavily influenced by my humanist and atheist father, and considered myself mostly an atheist, which means, not believing in God, with just a touch of agnosticism mixed in. I would say, I don't really believe in God, but when I see a beautiful sunset or I see something, a beautiful mountaintop view in nature, sometimes I wonder. As I grew into my own selfhood, I moved more firmly into agnosticism. I decided I really didn't know whether or not there was a God. I wasn't sure. Then in college, after falling in love with the sacred text of Taoism, the Tao Te Ching, my beliefs continued their evolution, and I moved into the beginnings of theism. I decided I believed that just like the Tao was in all things, that there was something, an energy of some sort that was in all beings, and perhaps in all things, and that I was okay calling that energy God, for lack of a better word. It wasn't until I was in seminary, about 10 years later, that I started to think that that energy that permeated the universe, that really it was love. Love energy everywhere in the universe, running through everything. And so that became, and still is, the God that I believe in. Love with a capital L, an energy or connective thread of some sort that runs through everything in the universe. That is what I believe now, that love with a capital L is everywhere, and that we each have a spark of the divine within us. The important thing for me, raised Unitarian Universalist, choosing to continue to live as a Unitarian Universalist as an adult, was that my faith encouraged me to keep questioning and to keep wondering until I've landed on the answer that is right for me now in this moment. Now, people don't need to be Unitarian Universalist. I'm just going to say UU moving forward. UU, right? Unitarian Universalist. People don't need to be UU to have their beliefs change and evolve. It happens to many of us over time. We also aren't the only faith tradition that supports the idea that faith and beliefs change. Our good friends at the United Church of Christ often use the tagline, "Revelation isn't sealed," indicating that God is still being revealed to them and to us in the world, and that their understanding is evolving. What makes Unitarian Universalists unique, in my estimation, is how much we UUs center this idea that our understanding, our beliefs, and our truths keep changing and evolving. Another way to think of this is, I hope we hold our questions tightly and our answers loosely. I hope we hold our questions tightly and our answers loosely. And by that, I do not mean that we shouldn't have answers. Of course we have answers. We have our current answers, and they are really important. And we can and should fight for them. We should fight for justice, and we should fight against inequality with everything that we have. And while we're doing that, we should also hold our answers loosely at the same time, as they are likely to be imperfect answers that still need refining. I am so glad that we were fighting hard against racism as a faith tradition 30 years ago. And I'm equally glad that we continue to work hard to figure out better ways to do that, and that our practice of anti-racism work has evolved. And the same can be said and is true of the current moment. Now we have language about working with white supremacy culture, right? That's new, relatively new, and we're trying to work to eliminate or transform, maybe a better way of saying it, transform white supremacy culture in our congregations and in our country. So that work continues to evolve, and hopefully it will always evolve. So holding our answers loosely doesn't devalue them. It just means that we're willing to change and evolve our answers as we learn and grow. Now, there is a balance to be struck, of course, because you can't question everything all the time, though I have certainly met some UUs who try to do that. That was supposed to be funny, but if not, it's okay. Maybe it hit a little too close to home? No, but right, we can't question everything all the time, or we get bogged down and nothing would ever get done. So I do hope that we hold it as a central tenet of Unitarian Universalist faith, that we come back time and time again and ask and revisit those central and important questions so that we can think and reflect and evaluate whether or not our answers are fine as is for the moment, or need wholesale change, or perhaps this time simply just need a little further refinement. So this is one reason to love the questions, because if we hold our questions tight and keep checking in on our answers, we can work to make sure that our answers are in line with our beliefs and values, and change the answers if need be, or refine them, or feel comforted by knowing that the current answer we hold is still now the best one available to us. Holding our questions tight and our answers loosely helps us to continually grow into the best version of ourselves that we can be at any given moment. Another reason to hold the questions tight, of course, was lifted up in our reading this morning. Be patient toward all that is unsolved in your heart, and try to love the questions themselves, like locked rooms and like books that are now written in a very foreign tongue. Do not now seek the answers which cannot be given you because you would not be able to live them. And the point is to live everything. Live the questions now. Perhaps you will then gradually, without noticing it, live along some distant day into the answer. Sometimes we need to hold the questions tight because the answers aren't obvious or aren't readily available to us. When I was 25 and working in telecommunications, I knew that I didn't want to work for the man anymore making money for my corporation. But I felt paralyzed because I didn't know what to do next. It felt too big, too overwhelming. Should I quit my job and go to grad school for organizational development, or for social work, or psychology? Should I try to transition to the nonprofit world? I just didn't know how to make this huge change. And so I was stuck seeking an immediate answer, and I didn't have one. My therapist at the time, though, had a brilliant response for me, and bonus, it was also a question. She said, "Why do you need to move forward by making a massive change in your life? Couldn't you just try out volunteering at a few different places in different fields and get a sense of what speaks to you?" Man, the light bulb went off for me then. And she was right. And so that's what I did. Instead of being paralyzed or letting myself be paralyzed by indecision because I couldn't decide on an answer that I didn't know enough to find in the moment, I lived into the answer. And I volunteered at a bunch of different places, including at the First Unitarian Church of Philadelphia, and well, you see how the story has ended. I lived into the question, and the answer turned out to be ministry, which wasn't even on my list to begin with. We as a church community are facing a similar kind of question now. What does it mean to do church in the post-quarantine but yet still pandemic world we're living in? We have no choice at this moment to do anything but to live into the answers to that question. We, like most other congregations, synagogues, mosques, and temples in this country, we don't have all the answers. We don't know what the right or the best way to be and to function as a church community in this new world is. And we're both living into and creating it as we both live into and create it at the same time. Maybe the answer we ultimately live into, like me ending up as a minister, maybe our ultimate answer isn't even one that we're considering right now. But there's no way to short-circuit the process. We don't have a choice but to follow Rilke's advice and to live the question now, so that one day down the road we can live into the answer. Friends, both of these paths with questions, the holding questions tight and answers loosely, and living the questions now so that one day we might live into the answer, they both ask of us essentially the same thing. They ask us to focus on the questions instead of the answers. This is countercultural in our country, and perhaps even countercultural in some aspects of Unitarian Universalism. We UUs do tend to love our science, our logic, and our reason, which give us answers. And we should love those things. They are a vitally important part of a holistic practice of faith exploration. And it also behooves us to practice spiritual humility. Spiritual humility and knowing that even though we fight for our truths in their current forms like cannonballs, that we know that those truths might change or need adjustment or refinement tomorrow. Spiritual humility and our willingness to hold the questions and live the questions when the answers are not available to us now. Spiritual humility means trusting the process and the power of questions and reflection, and being willing to change and adapt as new information comes in. That, my friends, spiritual humility, is why I hope we love the questions. Because they remind us that our answers are fallible and are likely to change over time, either significantly or through ongoing minor revisions. And because loving the questions reminds us that sometimes we don't know the answers, and that sometimes we can't know the answers right now, and that we'll just have to trust that we'll live on into the answers as we keep living the questions. We Unitarian Universalists aren't always known for our spiritual humility. As much as we often say out loud that we respect that everyone is on a different path, too often we quietly conclude that sentence in our head with, "But what I believe is actually right." Spiritual humility, loving the questions, holding the questions tight, living the questions, reminds us both that our current answers in their current form are temporary, and that we might not have the answers now or even in the near future. Spiritual humility reminds us that at best, any one of us human beings only ever holds one part of the truth. Spiritual humility reminds us that even when we think through things together, that our answers are still likely imperfect and that we still have more room to learn and grow. Friends, may you hold your questions tightly and your answers loosely. May you live the questions now. May you love the questions. May you practice spiritual humility.